doesn't make sense, and the historical record says it doesn't make sense, and ethics says it doesn't make sense, and yet many of our elites think this is a good idea.
The British did have a very unusual relationship with slavery. Now, we invested so much in ending it. They are effectively telling them, this is a country that hates you. This is a country that judges you or feels differently about you. It's just not true.
If I could begin with you, Nigel, welcome to Holy Smoke. I wonder if I could start by asking you a general question about what you call, in your gripping and very powerful book, the lust for self-condemnation that is expressed by the fashion for reparations. What do you mean by the lust for self-condemnation?
Well, lust, Damien, is an excessive desire, and what's excessive here is that with regard to reparations paid by the British to, let's say, West Africans or West Indians, it doesn't make sense, and the historical record says it doesn't make sense, and ethics says it doesn't make sense, and yet many of our elites, nevertheless, think this is a good idea. So there's something in excess of reason and evidence that's driving these people to endorse decolonizing views and pro-reparations views. And I try and speculate as to what on earth is driving them. And one of the things I think that's driving them is partly that this is virtue signaling. These are elites who are trying to demonstrate that they're being progressive. And up until this point, up until the point where the Caribbean nations and the African Union this week have started to demand trillions of pounds worth of reparations. Up until this point, it's been costless. It's been costless virtue signaling. The elites get to say we're being progressive, but now the demand is being made. Well, you say you're guilty, cough up.
Now, you are, in addition to being a member of the House of Lords and former Regius Professor of Moral Theology at Oxford, an Anglican priest. I think it's somewhat embarrassing for the Church of England that you should have written such a powerful criticism of the Church of England's own policy with regard to reparations, which you say runs out way ahead of evidence and reason and implies a shocking lack of due diligence. I wonder if you could talk just for a second about the historical evidence. The Church of England, wringing its hands, is basically insisting that it benefited from the slave trade. That Queen Anne's bounty was swollen by investments from, for example, the South Sea Bubble Company. But actually the evidence doesn't point in that direction, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, the story is quite complicated. But for a short period, the Queen Anne's bounty was involved in the South Sea Company, but the evidence is it made no profits, and in fact it started to be involved during a time when there was no trade because of war. And the period of time when there was any connection between the Queen Anne's bounty and slave trading was about 9 years. But the evidence is the church made no profit. But the Church Commission, who commissioned a piece of research into this, misinterpreted the data, and a number of eminent authoritative historians, Robert Toombs, Richard Dale, Lawrence Goldman, have shown this to be the case. And so the Church Commissioners have made a considerable historical mistake, but they're not admitting it.
I wondered why they haven't acknowledged it, because having read that chapter of your book, the evidence is so straightforward. First of all, that the Queen Anne's bounty was not swollen by funds from the slave trade, but also that, the South Sea Bubble itself didn't succeed in making money from the slave trade. You would have thought that, confronted by the evidence you presented here, the Church Commissioners will just have to admit that they're trying to do something on the basis of false evidence.
Damien, I would have hoped that was the case, but the problem here is that the Church Commissioners have run ahead. They have committed themselves to spending £100 million worth of the Church's funds that should be devoted to the ministry of the Church, to reparations for slavery. They've done that. So reputations are now at stake. And their behaviour so far has been, to me as a churchman, dismaying, because first of all they've said, well, we can't respond to some of these criticisms because some people would be upset if we were to. Presumably some people these are ethnic minorities. And then they've said, in fact on several occasions they have issued a veiled threat of legal action against some of us who are trying to get them to give an account of themselves. And most recently there's a piece of correspondence in which the representative of the commissioners made perfectly clear that so long as there's no public fuss, they don't really care about the historical truth or the ethics. They will just proceed. So my main criticism of the church commissioners has been that yes, they basically delegated this matter to what is in effect an activist group which vaunts its diversity in terms of skin colour, whatever, but had no intellectual diversity. And they should have exposed the assumptions that they were making to honest criticism, but they didn't. And according to the Charity Commission's own guidelines for trustees, I mean, diligent trustees should always challenge the assumptions of any proposed policy. And the Church Commissioners completely failed to do that, which is why I refer to it in my book as a shocking failure of due diligence.
Well, you've mentioned possible threats of legal action from the Church Commissioners over the claims in your book. I wonder if I could bring in Katie Lam, MP. Welcome to Holy Smoke, Katie. Thank you so much for joining us. You have been asking questions about the legality of the Church Commissioners' very ambitious scheme, first of all to invest £100 million in a fund, then to grow a proposed investment fund of £1 billion to pay reparations. Are they allowed, is this an entirely legal way of spending the church's money?
Well, the short answer is no. So the way that the charity rules work is if you give £100 to a donkey sanctuary, that £100 has to be spent on donkey sanctuaries. Now, there are, of course, an infinite number of worthy causes to which you could have given your £100, but you chose to give it to a donkey sanctuary, and that charity has to honour your donation, that's what you wanted to give it towards, and that's what they have to spend it on. What you can't do as a charity is say, okay, well, now I've got your money, I've decided that actually there's something more worthwhile to spend it on, and I'm going to spend it on that instead. And what the Church of England is trying to do now, so there was first a whole process where there was a job of work to get them to concede that this wasn't something they were allowed to just do anyway. And then they said, well, we're going to set up a separate charity and we're going to donate from our existing charity, which has an explicit and statutory responsibility to spend that money on parish churches and clergy. And instead, we're going to donate £100 million of that to a new charity, which will be about reparative justice and post-colonial, post-slave trade healing.
But that's devious.
Well, it's also, it makes a mockery of the rules, because if I could just set up a subsidiary charity, then there's no point in having a rule in the first place that says that the money that you give me has to be spent on what I told you I was going to spend it on. And the way that they're trying to get around this is they're saying that they have a moral obligation. So there's a sort of carve out in charity law for something called a moral obligation, but it's things like, for some reason you might get sued, or you have an employment law case, or, it's not, these are small payments designed for very specific types of scenarios. But what they're saying is that this constitutes a moral obligation to the tune of £100 million, and they're just going to give people's money away.
But they have no moral obligation whatsoever if, as Lord Biggar has demonstrated, the historical basis for the Church of England's, colonial guilt in this matter doesn't exist.
Well, and I would actually go even further, which is to say that is very important, and it exposes the fact that there's no logical and historical reason to do it in this scenario at all. But we're talking about something that happened 200 and more years ago. The tapestry of human history is complex. You can't unpick a single thread. And the idea that any charity could decide that moral obligation means effectively whatever the sort of fashion is of the day. So it could be this, it could be environmental causes. Every charity could say, well, we have a moral obligation to spend all of our endowment on the planet, because without a planet, there can't be any donkey sanctuaries or whatever. It's I think, a willful misrepresentation of the rules and the way that they're supposed to be applied.
And if the Church of England succeeds in this extremely devious scheme, surely that sets a very dangerous precedent for other organisations who decide to spend money in ways for which it was not intended.
Any organisation, and we live in a beautiful and ancient country, any organisation that was operating at the time of slavery, because one of the things that the church has said is, well, even if that's not true, even if there isn't any evidence that we profited directly, there were philanthropists there might have been philanthropists who gave money to this charity who themselves had some dealings in the slave trade or made some money from slavery, which is sufficiently vague, essentially, to capture almost everyone that might have been a wealthy philanthropist in that period of time. And that means any organisation operating then, be that a charity, it's every stately home, it's every old educational institution, is then captured by this precedent and either could choose to give a load of their money away or also could feel morally forced to do so.
And Nigel, isn't this a betrayal, in a sense, not only of the benefactors who made up Queen Anne's bounty, but also of everyday Church of England parishioners, whose parishes are, as has been pointed out by a number of clergy who contribute to the Spectator, really struggling to meet financial burdens imposed on them by the church commissioners and the enormously swollen central government of the C of E.
Yes, but it is a betrayal of ordinary parishioners, but it's also nonsensical because, I mean, Katie's made the point that since British involvement in slavery, and the church had minimal to none involvement at all, 200 years has passed. No one alive was involved in it. None of us are guilty. What's more, I think almost everything we inherit is tainted in some fashion or other. I mean, the church's inherited wealth, no doubt, was somewhat due to the exploitation of industrial workers or medieval serfs. Nothing we inherit, I think, is without taint. So why the focus on this particular alleged sin of the church? Well, I think it's because the Church of England has been caught up in the Black Lives Matter mentality since the killing of George Floyd in 2020 in Minneapolis, and really believes that the story that we are systemically racist, and this is a way for the church to demonstrate that it's not racist. I think it's something along those lines. Though, as I keep pointing out, I mean, all hard evidence is that Britain is among the least racist countries on earth. I mean, the World Value Survey of 2023 rated Britain among the least racist, alongside Canada and Australia, in sharp contrast to Russia, Iran, Japan, and China. So I think what's happened here is that the elite of the church has got caught up, as too many elites in the country have been, in the Black Lives Matter mentality.
And in addition, isn't the elite of the church, as you quite rightly describe them, entertaining, I think, a fatuous fantasy that a gesture of this type will win it popularity and help to shore up the demographic crisis in churchgoing?
No, absolutely. On the one and only occasion any church body has asked me to enter a discussion on these matters, which was about 4 years ago during COVID, by Zoom. I remember there were 4 of us, I think, and there was a bishop there. And at one point in the discussion, the bishop said, "This is such an opportunity, such an opportunity." He said, "My diocese, most of the population is Asian." And ever since then, I've been wondering to myself, an opportunity for what? I mean, do you really think that by beating your breast over over the churches involved in slavery 200 years ago, lots of Asian Muslims are going to become Anglicans. Seriously?
And what's the pitch? We're a terrible organisation, join us? I mean, I don't really understand. It's your point about, or your question about betrayal is a really good one. I've got, north of 100 parish churches in my constituency, many of them crumbling.
Yeah.
And to what I was saying earlier about charities already having their aim, this charity already has a charitable aim in which it is failing. You know, it's not like this charity is so successful in subsidising clergy around the country, and our parish churches are all in pristine condition and bursting at the seams with congregation, that they can afford to think, oh, well, what else could we turn our hand to? They already have a job. They're not doing it.
And I'm sure that, being MP for the Weald of Kent, many of those churches will be of historic importance and probably urgently need restoration. And that's something that the church commissioners should be addressing.
Many of them are 1,000 or more years old. They're totally beautiful. And they serve not just as architectural landmarks of our history, but they are also the heart of the village that they're in, the heart of the town that they're in. It's increasingly difficult now for my constituents to be able to go to their local church on Sunday, because they've all sort of combined into benefices where some of them only have occasional services, which is really heartbreaking for some of my constituents who've been to that church all of their lives and whose parents and grandparents did before them. So the Church of England already has a responsibility to people who already go, to people who already attend church, and it also has a mission responsibility. But neither of those things is at all related to reparations for slavery. And I just wanted to add to one of the things that Nigel was saying earlier. The British did have a very unusual relationship with slavery. Now, the way that some people talk about this is to imply that it was worse than anybody else, and slavery is obviously an abhorrent practice. But it took place in many civilizations all over the world throughout most of history. The thing that is unusual about the British relationship with it is that we invested so much in ending it. You know, we paid a lot of money, political capital, the lives of Navy sailors, ships, to do this, and to erase all of that as well, I think is really wrong.
This is not even acknowledged in the documents drawn up by the church commissioners, is it?
And there's not a word about it at all.
Surely that is in itself disgraceful, given the central role that Church of England clergy and adherents played in the abolition of the slave trade.
Absolutely, and in fact, even worse, one of the documents that the church commissioners rubber-stamped recommended the church should apologise to Africans for denigrating traditional African religion. And I showed this to a young Nigerian woman who's a novelist and also a journalist. She came to my attention some years ago because she published an article in the New Yorker, I think, about her great-grandfather who was an African slave trader. And I showed this to Tricia, and she was incandescent with anger because she's an African Christian, like 700 million other African Christians who chose to abandon their traditional religion for Christianity. And they didn't do it under a pressure of a gun, because the British couldn't possibly have forced them to turn to Christianity. They did it for a variety of reasons, but of their own free will. But the church commissioners have completely erased the heroic role of Christian missionaries, including Anglican bishops who died of disease in southern Africa in trying to suppress slavery. So it's not only is this a betrayal of people in the parishes now, it's a betrayal of heroic Anglicans in the past.
And implies something totally dishonest about race in this country, as you were saying earlier, that this isn't a racist country. But it's also totally irresponsible to anybody who might be reading what the church says, who isn't white, that they are effectively telling them, you know, this is a country that hates you. This is a country that judges you or feels differently about you. It's just not true.
Well, on the basis of what I've read in Nigel Biggar's new book, Reparations, The Tyranny of Imaginary Guilt, on the basis of what I've heard from you as well, Katie, I have no doubt that this is a major, multifaceted scandal. Thank you both for drawing attention to it and for joining me on Holy Smoke.
Thanks a lot, Damien.
Thank you.